And we are live. JT here. Welcome to The Huddle. The Huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to take a moment to thank you. Whether you are tuning in live as we stream into our Facebook community, whether you are watching the replay on YouTube or on Facebook, or whether you're listening to the audio on the podcast, thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And here's my reminder to you. The mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. So my challenge to you today is to go all in on this conversation and to keep that mind wide open. And I guarantee you will gain a valuable nugget of wisdom that will most importantly help you succeed at the game of life. So I've been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest today. We come from a proud football tradition and we connected over social. And what really resonated with me was just his passion for life, his passion for growth and evolution. And we thought, hey, what a great time to have the conversation. Start of a new year. People are in this space of being open to growth and evolution. My guest in the huddle today is a Western Mustangs Football alum, and he is doing some amazing work in the health and wellness space and really carving out that servant-based leadership. My guest in the huddle today is Cedric Joseph. How are you today, brother?
I'm doing pretty good, all things considered. Thank you so much for having me as a guest on your show today, JT. It's an unbelievable opportunity. I'm very excited to get into the conversation.
Yeah, definitely, brother. One thing before we get rolling here, before we get kicked off and run that first play, I really just want to thank you. I'm a firm believer in counting your blessings every day. And I believe that the biggest blessing that you can give someone is your time and energy. So I just wanted to thank you so much again for being able to invest some of your time and energy into being here with me and our community today, brother.
Of course. Thank you very much. I resonate with that as well. I think that's probably the only currency that we really have here as human beings in this life experience. So amen to that.
Okay. So, brother, one thing that I often like to remind people is that life is a game and games are supposed to be fun. So I'm curious, what is an interesting fact? I had a coaching colleague that used to say we all have our quirks. What is something maybe that a lot of people don't know about you, but you would be open to sharing with our community?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I'm kind of a geek for Star Wars. I love Star Wars. Star Wars has been something that has been with me since infancy. I think I watched the original trilogies when I was 6 or 7 years old with my father and just fell in love with the storyline and the characters. And watched the new, not the newest ones. Naturally, I watched the newest ones, but I actually had an opportunity to go in theater and watch Attack of the Clones and the closure of the Anakin Skywalker's saga, I guess you could say, in theaters and Revenge of the Sith. And that was an amazing experience. I went and watched that with my father. So that was really, really cool. I know a lot of people see the athlete, kind of always watching football or always lifting. And so I kind of have like a little soft spot for Star Wars in my heart.
I love that. And what I love about that is I think that speaks volumes. And one thing I've really come to appreciate you, that I've observed about you, is like you're a true Renaissance man. Like you have lots of different interests and passions, and that speaks volumes about your openness to growth and evolution.
Yeah. And like you said, it's about having fun, right? And so I actually just recently got into building Star Wars Lego sets or pieces kind of thing. So that's kind of like a hobby that I picked back up after I read a book by Robin Sharma,
Okay.
the Saint, the Surfer, and the CEO. And so in the book, the main character meets a saint, spends time with the saint, spends time with the surfer, and spends time with the CEO after the passing of his father. And the surfer actually mentioned, the character of the surfer says that we've got to step back into our heart center a little bit more to kind of find that joie de vivre, or that openness to life. And so you know, I when I was younger, I used to play with Legos quite often, and so I found that getting back into that and having fun and playing a little bit more and integrating that into my I wouldn't necessarily say routine, but whenever I can find the time. I've got 2 kids, a daughter who's just turned 2, and a son that was just born 2.5 weeks ago. So we're quite busy, but you know, finding time to throw in some fun and kind of get back to those activities that you know, made you feel good as a kid often help us kind of step back into that heart center, and kind of change perspective and help us recharge in a way that other activities don't necessarily help us recharge.
I love that. And I love everything you're sharing. And I know we're going to dive a little bit deeper into kind of where life has taken you and what path you're on. So brother, I'm curious, you know, you had a very successful career as an athlete, right? At a very high level, right? You won a Vanier Cup, which again, before we came on, was again, it was amazing to be able to watch, you know, you and the team bring the Vanier Cup back home where it belongs.
Yeah.
And so obviously sport has played an important role for you in your life. I'm curious, what has been the biggest lesson sport has taught you that you still find yourself applying to your life today?
Yeah, so sports has been in my life. I played football for 17 years. So I started football when I was 7 years old. And I played soccer. I started soccer when I was 5. Apparently that was a little bit too easy. It wasn't challenging enough. So I told mom and dad when I was of age, hey, let's get some cleats and strap on the shoulder pads. Let's have some fun here. So sports has pretty well much dominated my life up until this point. And so one thing for me is that specifically football, I think, is great at teaching young people discipline. As an athlete, you know, naturally there's the student component to that as well. And so you can't really run away from the student component. And so having to go to school and manage class or manage schoolwork, and also, you know, manage your sport. In my specific situations, football, I think there's a certain level of discipline that one has to have to be able to kind of manage both of those, especially as a teenager. You know, when I guess you could say social life becomes a really big priority for you. So you kind of get into a sphere where you're juggling, you know, school and social life and football. And so I found that football, the way that it's structured with practice, it's very methodical. It's a lot of the same things over and over and over again. And so at a certain point, you get to a space and a time where you're kind of just like bored, right? You hit this kind of boredom or this plateau. And I think that discipline helps, or kind of kicks in and revs in once you get to that boredom plateau in terms of, you know, doing the same things over and over and over again. And so for me, I think the biggest character trait or the biggest lesson that football taught me was discipline, how to do those mundane things over and over and over again, despite, you know, whether you're super excited and super ready, maybe at the beginning of the season, or versus at the end of the season where you're kind of just tired, you're banged up, you know, you don't want to do this anymore, but still kind of having to, you know, kind of get through it and go through it. And I think discipline is a great skill to cultivate, and something that I still very much keep in the back of my mind, but also I have it written out on my board so that every day after I take a shower and go get dressed, I can see that word discipline and make sure that, you know, despite life's challenges or despite how mundane the daily activities I have to go through seem, it's still very much important that I show up and I get them done. Just to kind of that to keep the order and the structure within life going, I guess you could say.
And it's interesting, right? And I appreciate you sharing. And again, I love the word that you use, discipline. And what I found is I find that this is interesting because I think some people feel the word discipline like there's a negative connotation with it.
Yeah.
But what I heard from you, I love the word you used. Discipline creates order, right? And discipline creates order in the mind. And, you know, the mind is, right? Your body's an instrument, right? For your mind, everything flows through there. So I really love that you're talking about discipline. So I'm curious from you, as you've transitioned from, you know, the football field where, again, you know, arguably, you know, one of the most successful decorated careers, right? And a long list of amazing running backs coming through Western. I'm curious, how has that discipline served you in this transition to the game of life?
I mean, I'm married, so there's a large piece of discipline that is applied there. I mean, in terms of not just specifically in my marriage, but in personal relationships in and of themselves. I think that you know, once you get to the mid-20s, you kind of take a step back and you're kind of just like, okay, quarter century, you know, university's behind me, I'm getting into real life work. You know, for myself, I'm married, I've got 2 kids, so personal relationships are they're important, and there's a saying that says the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the relationships that you have. And so for me, discipline in relationships is just, you know, taking the time to speak with the people I need to speak to, organize get-togethers on a regular basis or whenever I can, and depending on the particular situation that we find ourselves in globally as well, and just, you know, being disciplined and unpacking and getting to know myself, right? I think that as you go through life early on, it's kind of like an ebb and flow of, you know, exploring who you are. And then, you know, like I mentioned before, once you become a teenager, your social life becomes a priority. So it's more so understanding others by, you know, trying to fit in or trying to find what's cool or what is acceptable in a peer group. And then you get into your 20s, mid-20s, and then it's kind of back to the focus is back onto you. So there's a lot of discipline in relationships and, you know, your personal relationships with others and also your personal relationship with yourself. And so, you know, I'm an advocate for meditation. Meditation is a very, 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 very big pillar for myself. But I guess my Fantastic Four would be meditation, moving the body, journaling, and reading. And so having discipline to consistently interact and engage with those activities so that I can, you know, feel the best and show up for the people who need me to be at my best in life. Very, very important to have discipline there. Even at work, you know, we all try our best to get into work or a labor of love that we actually truly appreciate, and we want it to. We're kind of seeing this theme or this transition into a labor that we don't really consider labor. We consider it fun or we consider it play, and we enjoy it so much it doesn't really feel like work. And so, in that though, there's still tasks that you're not going to appreciate or that you're not going to want to do that you kind of have to do, you know, depending on the year, time of year, what's going on in the world might change some things. So at a certain point, you're going to have to go through certain things that you don't necessarily like. And I think that discipline is a really good tool of, like I mentioned, just creating order and just sticking with it. I think that and building confidence. I just saw this clip on Instagram earlier today, and a gentleman was talking about, you know, how consistency leads to confidence, which leads to courage. And so I think that discipline is actually the first step to that. So by having discipline, you can have consistency, which will build your confidence so that you can be a little bit more courageous in the activities that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So discipline is, for me, I don't know if I don't know if it's more so like I'm just born and I like discipline and discipline likes me, or if it's all my years of playing football, just having to do the same thing over and over and over again to improve in skill or master a certain set of skills, that I was just kind of just like, all right, I guess I'll just surrender to discipline. But I think that discipline is something that, is like you mentioned, we've got to reframe it and put a more positive spin to it. The positive spin I like to put on discipline is, the more discipline you have, the more freedom you can experience, I guess you could say, in terms of, I guess, just having an agenda, right? And scheduling your time, being disciplined with your time. That allows you to see, okay, when I have free time and when I have to prioritize and focus my energy on particular tasks. That's just a small example of how having more discipline can, grant you a little bit more freedom.
Yeah, no, I love that, brother. And I want to circle back to the whole discipline thing, because I definitely saw a theme there. So I want to harvest that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that one of my mentors and coaches shared some wisdom that his mentor and coach shared with him. He says, you can't manage time. You can only manage your activities. So I love how you talk about like that discipline to manage your activities. And sometimes, like you said, we all want to have all the ones that are all sunshine and rainbows and right. But sometimes it's the mundane stuff, and that's the separator.
Exactly.
What I really heard from you as you were talking there was that discipline to go within. And I think that's been one of the blessings of this last 2 years. Again, it's been an interesting time, and being mindful that everyone has had their own unique experiences. None are good or bad. It just is, right? That's energy is.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that you said, talking about the discipline to go within, whether it's meditation, whether it's reflection, whether it's, journaling. So I'm curious to you're starting to dive a lot deeper into this, right? You're starting to do some work with the Czech Institute. I'm curious, what has been your experience as you've learned to discipline yourself to go deeper with it? Like what has come up for you? What have you noticed?
I guess my journey with self-reflection started in high school. I guess it was the seed was planted in high school. And so in high school, my last 2 years, so in Quebec, we do grades 7 to 11 as high school. Then we have this thing called CEGEP before we go to university. So in grade 10s and 11, I had the opportunity to go to a program in Quebec that's called Sport Études. So what we do is from 8 to 12 in the morning, you go to class, you have a 1 hour lunch break. Then from 1 to 4, you play your specific sport. And so in my case, it was football. And so I had the opportunity to, in the football sport, it's a program that I was in, we had a sports psychologist. And so he would come in and he would, kind of teach us different meditative techniques, breathing techniques. We would play kind of different mind games that would prime the brain and prime the mind to kind of tap into the proprioceptive capacities of the human body, and kind of just, strengthening the connection of the mind body. And so the seed was planted there. Did meditation. Unfortunately, I was a little bit too young to understand what I was actually doing. And so during CEGEP, I didn't necessarily make it a discipline or make it a practice. And then it was the year that we won the Vanier in 2017, that's when I actually started meditating and I made it a practice. And so my journey with introspection and going within started in 2017. And I've been meditating ever since. And so naturally I started small, and now I can usually sit for 30 or 40 minutes if I want to, and I can go up higher if I have the time, if I have the liberty. But I guess the biggest thing for me, that the thing that meditation, meditation is it's very unique for the human organism. It has physical benefits, emotional benefits, mental benefits, spiritual benefits. It's kind of like it's the only one size fits all that or the closest one size fits all activity that the human being can do to help manage stress, an issue, a steep hill that they're climbing, whatever you want to call it. Meditation can definitely help out in some way, shape, or form. Now, the type of meditation that you do depends, but what it's taught me is just how important, you time, or in this case, me time, really is in being able to, call a timeout on life, sit for 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, an hour, however, whatever works with your schedule. Just to be able to go inside and just let just let everything settle, really, and let things pass, and just sit with yourself, and enjoy the time with yourself, enjoy space with yourself. Oftentimes you ask people, what do you love to do in life, or what do you love in life? And they list a whole bunch of things, but on that list rarely is it ever you or them, right? So we run into or I guess we're in a society that's so faster, bigger, stronger, that we often have a hard time stopping, or we feel guilty when we stop. And so for me, meditation is just a great way to check in with myself, see how I'm doing, set an intention for the day, for the activity, for the week, and really just go connect with my spirit or my soul, and just ask questions, and play around, and get information, or maybe get a little bit more motivation in some areas, or if I'm feeling off in a certain area of life, I'll go in and I'll ask questions and I'll interact. And I mean, for me, I'm going to be preaching meditation until I leave this plane. So meditation has pretty well much done it all for me. But I think the biggest thing is really just getting to know myself a little bit better, and gaining that personal confidence, I think, is something that's huge that I get from meditation. I know if I'm having an off day, at the end of the day, I can sit down for 10 or 15 minutes, feel a whole lot better, go to sleep feeling good, and then wake up and get back after it the next day. I do my best to start the day with meditation, because I just think that starting the day off with some quiet time and some self-reflection, I'll tag in a little bit of journaling there as well. Just a little bit of introspection, just so that you can gain perspective. I think that meditation is really, really great at helping people change their perspective, and really ask the questions that they need to ask, and get answers that they need to get.
I love that answer. And a couple things came up for me as you were sharing. It's recognizing and being aware that we live in a world that glorifies hustle and grind, right? That, 24/7, if I'm not doing something, like there's this guilt, this pressure that you're missing out on something, right?
Yeah.
But two, what really brought up there, and again, always looking for, okay, what's the learning opportunity, right? Great reminder from you is, people like yourself and I, we have the ambition, we have the drive, we have the coachability. It's not a question of doing the work. It's more coming from that place of, it's about harnessing that, so that when you engage in the work, it's consistent, it's focused, there's an intention, it's leading to somewhere, right? Exactly. So that's where I feel that meditation has been such a powerful tool for me, because it's learned me how to cool the jets, as I like to say, and then I can actually help and serve more people, because I'm focused on them and not thinking about the 18 other things I have to do after that.
Exactly. And that's a great point too. Meditation really helps train focus, and it really helps develop focus. And so if you're listening to this, and you're struggling with just focus, you find that your mind is kind of racing all over the place, I highly recommend picking up or practicing meditation, and start small. Don't try and be a Buddhist monk right off the bat. Start small, 2 or 5 minute sits. And I think that meditation is a really great discipline for working focus and training focus. And that is, yeah, extremely well said. Like you mentioned, I feel the same way after I come out of my sits. It's like, okay, things are much clearer, right? You can see things much clearer in terms of how you want to use the energy that you have or you've just generated, to be able to, like you mentioned, serve, be present, have intention, and really just be your best self.
You bring up a great point, right? Just around this idea of clarity, right? And I often love the analogy of, if I'm picking to take my family on a vacation, I first have to decide where I want to take them first.
Yeah.
And then you can start to, book the hotels. You can then start to book the flights and do all that. So that's what always reminds me about, clarity just allows us to get to where we want to go faster. Yeah. And with greater ease. So
exactly. Yeah.
So I'm curious, brother. So, you are in this space now where, that discipline to go within, you've done it, and now you are growing it more, and you're starting to dive deeper. So I'd love to know, what was the inspiration for you to start learning and starting to work with the Czech Institute to dive even deeper? I'd love to know.
Well, actually, one of my teammates actually introduced me to it, and so he's also practicing and doing school through the Czech Institute as well. But what I was drawn to at first was I'm going through the holistic lifestyle coaching branch, which is a 3-tier certificate, and what drew me towards that was just the I guess you could say the respect and the honor for spiritual well-being. And so as a holistic lifestyle coach, I help people, recognize and reduce stress using certain lifestyle, I guess you'd say, techniques, or being aware of where you can find stress throughout an individual's day or week or in their lifestyle habits. And so we look at nutrition, we look at moving the body, we look at, how our minds are working, right? Is it more positive? Is it more negative? But I also really appreciate the fact that there's a spiritual component to it, right? And I mentioned me time before, and I know spirituality is kind of like, it's such a loose and vague concept, right? I think spirituality is 100% subjective, and by that I mean it's personal, right? So what JT thinks is spiritual is different from what Cedric thinks is spiritual. There might be some general understandings, depending on the different, I guess you could say, spiritual or religious influences that you've experienced throughout a lifetime. But I think that a person's spirituality is, their own. It's very, very unique to themselves. And so as a holistic lifestyle coach, I help people cultivate a spiritual practice, and spirituality you can just really think of that as me time. So what do you like to do for me time? Anything that allows you to unplug and be with yourself, and not necessarily have to answer to all the things that you have to answer to in life, can be considered as a spiritual practice. And so for me, meditation, I know for a lot of people, it can be nature walks, it can be running, bicycling, going to the gym and lifting weights. It can be doing puzzles, Sudoku, whatever it is, finding those activities that help you fill your cup are things that can be deemed as spiritual activities or spiritual in concept. And so I kind of was really drawn to that. And I think that, in today's day and age, a spiritual practice is quite frankly missing in the daily or weekly lives of individuals. And so, yes, you can go to church once a week, but what are you doing for the other 7 days? Spiritually speaking, are you praying? If not, maybe, you could try that. I know a lot of people who are religious or who practice Christianity also meditate, and the meditation helps them with their their relationship with their God, I guess you could say. Oftentimes I hear that, you know, praying is like speaking to God, and meditating is like listening to God. And so that's a really great way to kind of think of it. But what drew me towards the Czech Institute and the holistic lifestyle coaching really was this component of a spiritual practice, and how important spirituality is for the overall well-being of the human organism. I guess understanding that there's a greater whole operating at all times is a very important concept to grasp, and to understand that, you know, as human beings, there is a larger energy field, or there is a quote unquote, I'll pull from Star Wars here, the force. There is a force. It's real. It's an actual thing that operates, and that allows us to experience this, and to feel what we feel, and to go through the different things that we go through, and really even just to be here as human beings, and to experience what we're experiencing. You know, there has to be something keeping it all together. Otherwise, it would kind of just all fall apart, and we wouldn't necessarily have the human experience. And so helping people cultivate that, and helping people you know, get used to that and interact with that for them, very, very, very important. And oftentimes a spiritual practice is going to break down and reduce lots and lots of stress. 20 minutes of meditation a day can help you get through the day feeling like Buddha, whereas different activities don't necessarily have a similar effect. And so outside of helping people, you know, eat a little bit better, move a little bit more, think a little bit more positively, it's very, very important in my line of work as a holistic lifestyle coach to get people to understand that, hey, you know, me time is very important. How much me time do you need to actually feel good and feel that you can, you know, deliver and serve and lead the way that you know that you can?
I really love what you're sharing, brother, and it really prompted me to you know, reframe how I look at things. And I love how you shared that, you know, spiritual practice really is it's really communicating, right?
Yeah.
You're communicating with, like you said, a higher purpose, and whatever. Like really, like you said, everything's energy, right? Energy just
Exactly.
is.
Yeah.
And regardless of what your source is, whether it's God, infinite intelligence, you know, the thinking stuff, it really doesn't. But I always relate it back to this idea is you just realize that you are playing for something greater than you, right? From an athlete perspective, right? Like there's a bigger purpose for you on this planet than just you.
Exactly.
And I love how you said that, like, it's just that opportunity, whether it's walking in nature, whether it's meditate, it's finding out what works for you. And when you find out what works for you, then it's almost, it makes that connection to the spirit, mind, body. It feels less daunting because you're meeting people where they're at. Some people, they may not be wanting to, you know, have this big conversation about infinite intelligence, universe, source, but they might like to go out for a walk. And if that walk allows them to connect to themselves, get greater clarity, then great, that's a win. So exactly. I really love you're really breaking it down. I can really see the athlete mindset, you know, really kicking in for you.
Oh, and I'm a big believer in keeping things simple. Like let's not like let's not overcomplicate things. Let's not use language that the common individual doesn't understand. You know, I understand we have phones and we can look words up, but like let's get away from overcomplicating things that are truly very simple in nature. And I think oftentimes the solution to complex problems are simple. They're very, very simple. And I often, you know, people have a hard time with that. Yeah. Generally speaking, people have a hard time. They're like, oh my gosh, really? Like all I have to do is go for a walk for 20 minutes every single day? Like what? That's unbelievable. But that's sometimes all it takes. But yeah, I mean, different strokes for different folks. Yeah. You know, just yeah, just cultivating and that me time, just super crucial, because I find that a lot of people don't prioritize their own self, and chalking out, 30 minutes, an hour, like however much you need, you need to be chalking up a certain amount of time every single day for yourself. Get away from the kids, get away from the spouse, get away from the friends and the parents and all, I guess you'd say the noise of the world or of your world, and really just be with yourself. And I think that is, something so simple, but unbelievably powerful.
I think you just shared a powerful reminder that the amount of time and energy, and I'll include money in there, that you're willing to invest in your greatest resource, which is you.
Yeah.
Like that return on investment will will pay back 10, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. Who even knows, right? So
Yeah.
I love that. So I'm curious, brother. I know that you've been doing some work with an organization called Love in Quebec, and you've been working, in schools and looking to bring some of these practices. From my experience, I'll just share with you quickly. I know near the end of my formal career in education, I was starting to teach some of these concepts of personal growth, self-development, self-actualization, mindfulness, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I framed it as, it wasn't a conversation around mental health. And the reason I said it was, I feel like that word sometimes, we just got to meet people where they're at. So I said, hey, everyone might not want to have a conversation around mental health. And I was thinking more about, where was I at 14, 15 years old? I would have drowned that out, and I am self-aware. But everyone wants to feel happy, healthy, and well.
Yeah.
So I have found that when I started introducing these practices to young people, they are so open to it, and there's less of a resistance to it, because I don't know. I just don't know. I think as you're younger, you're a little more open, you're a little more connected to spirit, mind, body. So
yeah.
I'm curious from you, what has your experience been as you have worked with young people and started to introduce some of these tools that have transformed your life? Like, what has your experience been like?
Yeah, a lot less ego in the young human, for sure. And so that helps as a teacher or a guide or a leader of these different, I'll use the word philosophies. I think that there are particular ideas or philosophies that an individual, practices and walks around with. But generally speaking, not a lot. Like you mentioned, teenagers are very open. I think it's they're open to it because it's something new, and it's not part of their everyday mundane kind of go to class, learn math, learn English, do the history and geography. And so it's kind of like I guess you could say it's kind of like a break for them. And it's something new, and the brain thrives on novelty. So if there's something new, the brain is it's gonna, like you mentioned, it's gonna be a game for the brain. The brain is gonna be like, oh my gosh, this is this new thing. What are the rules? How do I play? How does it work? Am I good at it? And like, how does it feel? Right. And so I think that, young people are really good at getting in front of new things or practicing something that's new, and really submerging themselves in the activity. And I've gotten both, right? I've gotten youth who are super adamant and super committed and really interested and intrigued and probably already know a whole lot about it already. And then on the other side, I've got kids who want to be a little bit more tough and be like, oh no, this isn't cool, this is whatever, we're not monks, we don't have to do this kind of thing. So it's been an interesting journey so far, but I think that, again, back to discipline and consistency. If you can show up, so I mean, in my line of work, we're usually at schools once a week. So that notion at the beginning, naturally, the kids are kind of like, who are these people and what are they here to do? Are they even cool? Like, what is this kind of thing? And then you get that for the first, I guess, month or two, as you kind of feel each other out. And so we usually work in twos. So we're program coordinators, and we usually work in twos, and it's group work, right? So we have groups of 20 to 25 youth. And so as the group feels the coordinators out, and as the coordinators kind of feel out the group, there's kind of like a cohesion that builds, shortly after the holiday break, where the kids kind of just go, all right, they're here every Tuesday, same time, same place. And so I guess that cohesion and that trust starts to build, and that's when you can, really start going much deeper with them and explaining to them the importance of certain activities and how it can help them in their daily lives with whatever they're facing, whether it's, taking some time to be with themselves or moving their bodies. We do a lot of work with media arts, so photography, creative writing, group-based discussion. So the importance of, I guess you'd say, art therapy, or finding those activities that bring some fun into your day or into your life, very, very important. And that's pretty well much what our curriculums are founded upon. And so just that introspection into journaling, that I guess you'd say soft communication skills in speaking with others and listening, active listening, and practice not interjecting or not interrupting another person when they're speaking and letting them finish their thought. Very, very important. And the photography, photography is just fun in and of itself, and we set up different activities and we help them practice different modalities of taking pictures, whether it's portraiture, taking close-up photography pictures, and so we help them out there. So we give them tools throughout the whole year that we're with them. We give them tools to be able to our goal is to foster and nourish their emotional intelligence. So we want them to interact with our activities and mature emotionally from beginning to end. And so I actually had the opportunity to create a curriculum of my own, which included more physical activity, because I found that as we develop as a society, in Western society, we find a lot of people are a lot more sedentary than when we once were, which causes more problems. And if we're more sedentary sooner in life, being elementary and high school years, then that, not that we're setting kids up for failure, but we're pretty well much teaching their brain and their body that sitting or being sedentary for this amount of time is okay, or it's normal, right? And science already has proven that sitting for too long is not a great thing for the body or the mind. And so when I started with the organization 3 years ago, it was great work. Emotional intelligence is something that is really, really important to cultivate. I've just found that, especially with my background in athletics, and how consistently moving my body helped me mentally and physically, I found that we needed a curriculum that helped the kids get up and get moving, especially with the reduction in the amount of gym class that the kids have to do, especially in high school. I found that, hey, if we can get them moving their bodies a little bit more, I think that would really help. And we can, there's an emotional intelligence component to physical exercise, and I think that those two bodies really marry very, very nicely. And so the curriculum encompasses exercise from slow yoga, stretching type styles of exercise to games and sports and competitive circuits that are a little bit more intense. So the kids get to experience a whole range of exercise. So hopefully they can learn and kind of feel what kind of different styles of exercise works best for them. And they can hopefully take that on and later on in life and kind of look back and be like, oh yeah, we did this thing. Yoga was really cool in high school. That was awesome. Maybe I'll pick it back up when I'm, 20 or 21 or whatever the case might be.
I love that, brother. And I love that, you're finding those opportunities to create curriculum. And, I know I could very easily dive down the rabbit hole because, having a background in education, but
yeah,
I feel like this is the first of many conversations, because I feel this conversation around curriculum, how do we embed these things into schools is really how we set up young people to be successcil.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm curious, brother, I have one last question for you. And be respectful of your time and energy. So, I'm a big believer in like asking questions, stretching people, and just like push it, and again, I know you're someone who embraces being outside the comfort zone.
Yeah.
What would 10xing or 100xing your vision of what you're creating, like what would that look like to you? thinking impossibility?
Yeah, I think really just oh my gosh, like I guess just pure utopia,
Yeah,
right?
pure, yeah.
But I mean, for me, it's I mean, I guess like playing football was an unbelievable, like I guess you'd say for me in life, I really am just I want people to believe in themselves and have confidence within themselves to actually, you know, wake up and face life's challenges head on with faith and courage, and tenacity and with a certain fire. And so football was a great way to kind of hopefully inspire people to do that, and inspire people to just and like just go for it and have fun and play and you know, make mistakes, fall forward. I guess as a former running back, that's something that we were always taught. Is, you know, as a ball carrier, you've got to fall forward, you've got to get the extra yard or two after being tackled. And I think that applies in life as well. But I think what I'm really here to teach people is just the fundamentals. And I'm really interested in helping people get down to what helps them feel really great, fundamentally speaking. I'm not a specialist by any means. Hopefully I'll earn the rank of master one day. That would be awesome. A Jedi master of some sorts. But I'm really here to teach people the fundamentals of what makes them feel really good, so that they can cultivate that and go on to, you know, be a better person, be a better wife, be a better brother, be a better teammate, be a better coworker, et cetera, et cetera. And so I believe if human beings understood what it took fundamentally for them on a personal level to feel their best, I think the utopia would set up itself over a matter of time. But I mean, you know, we're talking about centers where holistic health is something that's really cool, or that's mainstream. And so maybe you go to you know, a center and the, you know, the nutritionist is in there and the exercise physiologist is in there, and it's a big center, kind of, I don't know, kind of like an American college, right? Like the American football is really big, and I feel like, you know, I've been to a couple of them to kind of see that they kind of already have that set up. I don't know if all the athletes have access to that, but I certainly know that the football players have access to some of the best, I guess you'd say, care and treatment, and just their overall environment. And I think if we can get that into you know, the quote unquote the average person's lifestyle, I think that we can really raise the bar on health. We can really raise the bar on overall well-being. We could really raise the bar on just the quality of life, human to human. And I mean, you know, I get like, just let's just solve all the problems.
Yeah.
Like let's just get rid of, let's just focus on all the nagging issues that we have as a global society.
Yeah.
Right. And hopefully one day we can all get, you know, roughly on the same page.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, you know, one philosophy, one way for all 8 billion and some change of us, but at least if we could, you know, I guess I'll speak on, I mean, I'm a North American and I, you know, live in a Western society. So if and there's some pretty stark, you know, stats and graphics going on this side of the world. And I think when people interact with that and ask themselves, okay, so what can I do to help bring those down a little bit, right?
Mhm.
I think that's when we can get into, you know, having daily practices that make us feel good, just so that we can show up and be, not necessarily say like, you know, Superman or Wonder Woman's 24/7, or, you know, be, you know, cancer free or mental illness free or whatever the case might be. That's not necessarily like my utopian vision. I guess you could say the utopian vision is really just to get people to a place where they can confidently walk through life, enjoy the good times when they're here, wrestle and compete with with the I guess you could say the challenging times, because I think that when challenging times do arrive in life, it's really your attitude towards that challenge that's going to determine the outcome of whether you feel good or whether you feel really bad about that outcome. And so there's a great book written by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which is an excellent book. I highly recommend everyone who's listening or who will eventually listen to this piece to go get that book, pick it up. If you already have it and you've read it, reread it again, because I think it's an amazing piece on how a person's attitude really determines how they're going to experience life, or the different meaning that they ascribe to whatever it is that they're experiencing in a given moment. But I guess my utopia is very, very fundamental. I guess you could say it's not very complex. It's very simple. And I mean, at this point for me, it's trying to touch as many people as I can and trying to have as many conversations as I can and trying to help as many people as I can and really get the ball rolling on, hey, the challenges that you go through in life, you can probably cut a lot of those out. And then the ones that you're left with, you'll have an abundance of energy to be able to go through them and really just tackle them and interact with them and be a little bit more curious as to why you're actually experiencing what you're experiencing. And so the utopia, everyone's healthy, everyone's pretty well much respecting their neighbor, helping their neighbor out, doing their own thing, and trying to advance human, I guess you could say, civilization forward in a really positive way. Because I mean, the human we're just there's just so much abundance that's part of our experience, on all levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And I think that when people can kind of tap into that and practice the things that help them get all the gears going, magic starts to happen.
I love it, brother. And I love that you're sort of painting this vision. I can see your mind creating and envisioning what that looks like. So brother, I appreciate you playing with me and immersing yourself in that big overarching question. So I love it, brother. So tell me, what can we do to help and support you in what you're growing right now?
That's a great question. Wow. Just, I guess for the most part, just, figure out what works for you, figure out what works best for you. Be curious, be open-minded. Like you said at the beginning of the conversation, I think that when you are, engaging with personal growth, you've got to be super curious. You've also got, you pretty well much have to play scientist with your own life. Okay, what activities work, what activities don't work, how long should I do these activities? Have fun with it. When you get discouraged, sit back and reflect on why you even started the journey in the first place. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a group of people, and really just figure out what works for you. Because when you can feel good and feel energized and feel primed and ready to tackle your day, then you have energy to kind of help out other people. I guess the analogy that I'll use here is fill your own cup first. That way you can help others and fill other cups that are around you. You can't fill an empty cup with an empty cup. And so just doing those activities and doing those rituals, I guess you could say, we can call them rituals or practices or disciplines, on a consistent basis, that help you just feel good and help you show up and be the best person that you can be. I think that's all you know you could really ask for, right? And you know, engage and interact with people who have high energy, who think the same way as you do. I think environment is super, super important. And so if you're in an environment that's not necessarily supporting you or not backing you or positively influencing your behavior, then you got to change the environment around a little bit. There are plenty of books on how to do that out there, but really just, you know, becoming a scientist and really just picking and choosing and trying. And, you know, if something doesn't work, that's okay. Like, you forget about it, throwing it in the trash can, delete, move on to the next activity. If you've got a core, like for me, I've got my Fantastic Four already. Like I mentioned, I do Lego. I try to incorporate a little bit of painting. So, you know, there are different things out there that you can try and incorporate if you already have a core to, you know, step out of your comfort zone. I think stepping outside of your comfort zone is a great way to grow, and kind of find what works for you and what doesn't work for you. But also, you know, if something works for you, don't sacrifice that. That's gonna hurt, and you'll probably get to end of that path and be like, I probably shouldn't have let go of that practice. And that's okay. And you know, that's part of being open-minded and being curious and trying and experimenting. But I mean, all I could really ask people to do is really just truly find what works for you and lean into that really, 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 really hard. And like I mentioned before, you know, you'll reach a particular point where the magic will start happening and you'll feel great. Yeah.
Okay. I love it, brother. Hey, I want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for the man you are, you know, the great husband, the great dad, the great teacher, coach, the great leader, but more importantly, the amazing human being you are, brother.
Thank you
The
so much.
one thing I've really gained from this conversation is how a spiritual practice, like how simple it can be. Because, you know, sometimes it's easy to feel like it has to look a certain way. And what I really got with you is, what is one thing I can do today to connect to myself, to go a little deeper with it? And that's really what resonated with me. And it was a great reminder that that's how you keep it simple in life.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Thank you so much, JT.
Hey, no worries. So here is my challenge to you. Cedric offered so many valuable nuggets of wisdom, different perspectives, and just simple everyday things you can do to reach your next level of greatness. So I want to remind you that knowledge is potential power. It's the consistent and focused application that actually creates great results. Rep in, rep out, day in, day out. So my challenge to you is to go apply one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom to your life today so you can reach your next level of greatness. And as I remind you every time in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness. You are worthy of greatness. You are greatness. Now go get your birthright. I look forward to chat with you next time in the huddle. Have a blessed rest of your day.
Thank you so much, JT. Take care, everyone. Thank you.